All right. Good day. Lovely to speak to you guys again. Maybe it might have been a minute. Shout out to myself. Spoke on the JSC. What a time to be alive. Um, Today I want to speak about BRICS. It's the 24th of August. It happens to be the last day that the summit is on. And when you keep saying that you're gonna tune into something and then you never really do because yeah, time just flies. And as well, it breaks, you kind of never really understood what you expect from it and what to get from it. And I think it was Wednesday or Tuesday, yesterday or the day before, when I kind of realized that, you know what, this has already eluded me or thankfully, I'm a bit late and yeah, basically it is what it is. But one of the reasons was nothing really ever compelled me to watch it, you know? And what I ended up doing instead of watching it was saying to myself, let me actually experience it the way I would have if I wasn't someone that was into these things or that looked into these things and actually engage with people as to what BRICS is, what does it mean for you, what does it mean for them, that sort of a thing. And what immediately struck me was how uninvolved and uninterested we are. And sometimes when you say we are, it sounds like we're talking about the youth. But in this case, I actually mean everybody. Like nobody cares. Literally nobody cares about BRICS, which I don't know if I was supposed to worry or I didn't know what to make of it. So I decided, let me engage and let me hear what people have to say about it. And the comments were hilarious, but essentially it was something along the lines that the adults are having a conversation. You, as the children, should basically just be quiet, don't be seen, don't be heard, sit in the other room and let them finish, which is quite interesting because these things actually do affect us. So I was curious to know to what extent do we then just sit in the other room and not say anything? And then when we do engage or complain about our everyday issues, to what extent are they affected by what would have transpired at the BRICS summit and other summits like this one? And so I thought perhaps let me just have a conversation and talk to you guys about how I approach it and what it means to me and where it fits in and where I panic, where I don't panic, that sort of a thing. So for those of you that don't know, which actually existed. BRICS is essentially Brazil, India, China, Russia, and South Africa. Those are so far the five countries that are involved. They started in 2020, 2010. And the idea was essentially just to start an informal type of conversation, type of blog, type of um, alignment, so to speak. And over the years, what has happened, and I think a friend of mine, a lawyer in London, you know yourself, um, commented yesterday that, what's sad for me is that it seems as if BRICS is just a regurgitation of the numbers. So we constantly reminded how big the GDP is of the BRICS alliance, how big the military is of the BRICS alliance, the population, um, that sort of stuff. And we never really get anything out of it. We never really get what to expect, what to hear, that sort of thing, which I think it's pretty much in line with what I also have experienced. Beyond them explaining who they are, I've never really gotten to get what is it that they want to do. But I think this year became one of those years where it seems as if there was a lot more direction as far as what is possible with this block. As you know, what has been trending throughout the year this year is the fact that they're going to launch a new BRICS currency. And as the BRICS countries, they essentially will trade with themselves using that currency. One of the other things that came out, but that was years back, was the development bank that BRICS had formed. I think this year was one of the cornerstone years where it actually became enacted or became effective or something substantive. And now it is up and running, and we're starting to see that shaping out, right? And yeah, essentially that. that is in a nutshell what BRICS is. It's a group of countries that have decided that they're going to start exploring together what is possible and how they can have alternative trade and alternative engagement from the rest of the world. Of interest and of note, what tends to happen is that we then describe BRICS in opposition to the West and what exists in the West. And what has essentially transpired is that a lot of countries, I can't even say African countries anymore, they tend to have a somewhat cordial relationship with the US. And if I'm using the word cordial incorrectly, tell me in the comment section. English is by far not my first language. I think it's probably like number 3 or 4 in the pecking order. But by cordial, I didn't mean actually they were on good terms, but I meant it's an uncomfortable, aggressive type of relationship, right? And it used to be that it's African countries, but with the war in Ukraine and with the company wars between China and the US, it actually has transpired that a lot more than just African countries have a bone to pick with the West, represented by the US, but then also the UK, Britain, all of that stuff. So it seems as if BRICS then is forming a Eastern or an alternative type of bloc where they're saying that, listen, we don't have to run our countries and the world on American terms and in Western terms. There is an alternative, and it looks something like this. Yeah, and it essentially that is that an alternative to the West, right? Of particular importance for me, one of the things that came out when I was speaking with my Western friend or my friend who's a lawyer in the UK, she mentioned that I think it was the Prime Minister of India or China indicated that one of the things that are on the agenda, one of the things that are going to take center stage in the next couple of years would be the legitimizing of traditional medicines and let's call it alternative medicines, right? For those of you that don't know, a lot of what we consume today as medication, so your Panadols, your Myprodols, you name it, I'm not a doctor, so I don't really know the names. Essentially, the active ingredient, the thing that heals you, a lot of the patents and a lot of the manufacturing of that stuff gets done in India. Kind of like how the design of the iPhone, for example, would be done in the US, and then it would get manufactured in China. In this case, the design happens in India, the manufacturing happens in India, and then your friends go and buy the patent or buy the product from India, and then they roll it out in the rest of the world and essentially get kudos for coming up with um, cures for a lot of the common illnesses. Now, with that, I think what you then will understand is that that actually makes India quite a big authority when it comes to medications and medicines. I mean, India being a very diverse and huge country, what also is very prevalent there is that over and above Western medication, they're actually very strong when it comes to um, more natural anecdotes and more daily type of medications or alternative type of medications. And that essentially also gives them an authority to speak on alternative medicines. Now, if you go even further and we talk about China with represented by Xi Jinping, um, the president there or the prime minister there. China, on the other hand, as we know, they're very strong on traditional medicine. So with them, it is a lot more normalized and a lot more standardized. For those of you that do remember, I think it was in 2015 or 14, somewhere around there, where our own president at the time, President Jacob Zuma, essentially opened an African traditional medicines wing to the South African Bureau of Standards. And I remember reading a small snippet at that time that said, or it was, they were quoting him, and he said, 85% of South Africans rely on traditional medicines compared to about 20% that rely on Western medication. And something simple, for example, if you've got a mental illness and you get prescribed those drugs, essentially you go to a pharmacy and you find out that they're about 500 Rand to 3,500 Rand at a point. You know, for a country that has got a low income ratio, income per capita, you can imagine spending 3,500 Rand on medication is a total absolute non-starter. And so what you tend to find happen quite a lot, even though a lot of people wouldn't say it or a lot of people wouldn't brag about it or show it, is that you find a situation where people actually use a lot of traditional medication. They essentially just hide it. And ladies, you can call me out on this. Essentially, you'll find people holding black bags and that sort of thing. But already, that has already been SABS approved. It's just I'm not certain as to how then the rollout of the medications themselves happen. But a lot of traditional medication do have a home within the SABS, the South African Bureau of Standards, for them to get tested, certified, and essentially be made a lot safer and a lot more available in the mainstream. Now, what impressed me about that coming out of BRICS, or at least what impressed me about that period, was for someone who wasn't interested at all in the whole BRICS conversation and the whole BRICS alliance and what's happening, it started to create in me this thing that says, okay, I think I might like this China and India alliance. Then comes Russia, then comes Brazil, that sort of a thing, right? Just like you, I'm afraid of Putin. I'm half the time I don't want to step on his toe. And Brazil, I pretty much don't yet understand what's the relationship that we have with them. That sort of thing. It would be nice for Neymar to come and play Bafana Bafana. Whether we win or not doesn't matter. What matters is that we get to strengthen our ability to watch those guys. So when I watched that, or when I heard her say that, I felt embarrassed on behalf of us as a country, and as a people, as a continent, because a lot of the times when you mention Africa and Africans, we tend to position ourselves almost as the custodians of culture or the custodians of everything ancient and mythical. And for a suggestion like that to come from China and India, I felt was pretty embarrassing because what then have we been contributing? What then have we been putting forward whenever we've said, let's end slavery, let's end colonialization, that sort of thing, and we want to be taken seriously as a people? Seriously on what terms? Today, if you speak good English, today, if you someone who is seen to have had a good education, it would be if you westernized and if you're able to adapt to the way of life of Westerners. I was watching a TikTok yesterday where they say, yeah, people komagaeng or people in the homes or people back in the rural areas. And I thought to myself, that is very interesting that by asserting ourselves, we're not saying we want to be more like people in the rural areas. In fact, we want to be more like people in the West, which was quite interesting. But as I say, from a medical perspective, it was embarrassing to have China and India come up with that suggestion. I know another topical thing that came out. My friend says President, who's this? President Cyril Ramaphosa indicated that we had given some cheetahs to the Indian president, and she was taken aback. Oh, my God, how many cheetahs did we give, and how often does that happen? That we're giving away cheetahs as good gestures and goodwill tokens, that sort of a thing. And when am I getting my cheetah as a South African? Look, I think it's one of those corruption things or one of those things that tend to often sidetrack us. Normally, for me, that sort of a thing, I really don't care, to be honest with you. I don't think that's the biggest evidence of corruption. I think what comes out of BRICS is a lot more important than the cheetahs that went the other way. If one day we wake up and the Kruger Park is Indian owned, then I guess I would have underplayed it. But those are things that I normally don't try and be distracted by or get fascinated by when they come out. The fact that President Ramaphosa shook hands with that president, or that he buys buffaloes, or that he buys Ankole, or that he money launders for that, I really don't care, to be honest with you. I don't care. What I care about is the far-reaching policies that affect 60 million South Africans, that affect our 3 trillion economy. What are we saying about that? What is he saying about that? Because at the end of the day, if we resolve the issue of the $6 million under his mattress or under his couch or whatever, we've still only just scratched the surface of the entire problem or the problem set that we face. So for me, that's that on that, which is then going to start leading me into talking about the coin or the currency. But just one last thing that I want to touch on that. It's on the issue of representation, because as you can hear with some of these issues, it's almost like we're clutching on straws. It's almost like we're just waiting to hear something that invokes a reaction or a response from us, and only then react or participate to that. And one of these things was, she said that there was the youth ICT lady that spoke there, and not ICT per se, but the youth BRICS head or chairperson or that sort of a thing. And I thought to myself, my God, who is this person? And for me, it reminds me of what my dad always says. He says, he feels as if the Constitution is underrepresentative. And why it's underrepresentative is because around the time that it was drawn up, he was a major, he was an adult, he had done his varsity, he had gotten his qualification, and he was working. And at no point was he consulted when that was happening. And he saw no reason to not be consulted because he was the youth of the time, he was the intellectuals of the time, and he was one of the few professionals of that time. So if a constitution that is supposed to represent the masses could be drawn up without his involvement, then he wonders then who was consulted and where was that consultation? As early as it was after apartheid, if they had consulted based on location, he was still from and living in a poor area. If they had consulted based on academic merit, he was there. If they had consulted based on being a young professional, he was there. If it was the consultation was based on unemployment, he had friends, he had people that he knew that were there that he should be able to point at and say, oh yes, I remember when the constitution was being drafted, these friends of mine were consulted on it. And so that brought me then to the youth lady. As some of you may not know, in South Africa, the definition of youth is anything from 18 to 35. And this year, I'm 31, for example. I do feel as if I do meet the same criteria that my dad would have met when the constitution was drawn up. And I immediately was taken aback when I heard that there was a youth representative there. Or, okay, who is this person representing, and what views did they get from those people? And why was I not consulted or made aware of a platform where I can give contributions regarding BRICS? And as some of you may know, I actually am quite active in these spaces, to a point I've got about two, now three friends that are actually at the summit as delegates. So I actually am quite clued up on what happens around these sort of events. Even though I'm not clued up on BRICS itself, I should have at least been able to say that if there is a youth representative there, one of my friends, one of the people I know, should be able to say, listen, I was part of the group or the survey or the case study that contributed to inputs, which led me to a conspiracy theory that I have. And it's not really conspiratorial, but what tends to happen nowadays with representation and young people, it also happens with the old people, because I'm interested. Bo lady, where do you guys discuss BRICS? We often talk about the youth not participating, but where do adults participate? Where do you guys discuss the ANC manifesto? I'm actually curious to know. In fact, I'd even absolve the youth in saying if something comes out of BRICS that affects them, it's going to trend on social media. Whereas with the gang 40 to 60, where do you guys discuss your public participation? Whenever you say the youth is not involved, where are you involved? Where are your meetings? That sort of thing. But I was discussing then the nature of representation. And I've seen this quite a few times where someone who essentially is very well connected or very well networked when it comes to these events gets asked to give an opinion of how the youth can be involved in this sort of a thing. And what tends to happen is, I think, unwittingly or without noticing, they kind of feel the need to be the spokesperson of the youth without doing any youth engagement or questioning for a number of reasons. One of them being, well, for you to be in that position, you must have worked hard, network, that sort of thing. So it kind of feels like you belong there and you are the correct person to be there because of your efforts. Equally so, because you're young and because you're female in some instances or male in some instances, it feels to you as if you represent the youth. But representation actually also involves consultation. You can't just see you being there and ask these questions as somebody's trying to get a piece of your wisdom and your intelligence. Some of it actually may just mean, listen, we think you have a way to access people like you. What are they saying? And you should be able to tap into those WhatsApp groups, those Twitter spaces, and say, guys, this week let's discuss what we would like to see out of BRICS, what is possible, what is not possible. And based on that, gather all those inputs and then literally just go there to give a report. Your opinion is really not that representative at all. And the same goes for politics, the same goes for business, what have you. The fact that you grew up in a township and that you now have got the opportunity to speak on a certain platform does not necessarily mean that you're representative of that platform. It just means that you're the one guy that managed to get the mic. And I still do then say, when it comes to representation, I think a lot can be done when it comes to soliciting the views of people and engaging people who on whose behalf you actually are speaking, which is the exact reason why so many people are uninvolved when it comes to BRICS. Because for 13 years, we've been a member of this alliance, but I don't know anyone that has ever been engaged on what is their view and what is the participation that South Africa can have or can bring or contribute towards the BRICS alliance. Again, it doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm just saying that if I'm one of the people that are educated, graduated, employed in a country where that is a very rare combination of things to have, as well as networked and well traveled around the country, I find it quite suspicious that there's a lot of silence around where some of the views are coming from. That said, I'll move into the economics and the currency. A friend asked me, what do you think of the BRICS currency and what do you think is going to be its impact on the markets, right? And I said to him that, to be honest with you, it's the same as Bitcoin for me. I think it either is going to be something that doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So it's supposed to be a medium of exchange, but people are using it as an investment, which I find very weird. Or if it does become a medium of exchange, then I don't necessarily need to buy it. What do I mean? Currency is currency. You don't need to buy the South African rand somewhere, right? By virtue of you getting a job, by virtue of you creating value in the economy, you will get paid in rands. And my hypothesis is it's the same with the BRICS currency. If it does become legal tender and it becomes something that we must use, then next month your salary will just come in purple banknotes or maroon banknotes with Xi Jinping on the cover or Putin on the cover. And you know now that, hey, you're using the BRICS currency. Equally so, I'm an investor. So for me, it just made sense that, well, then dividends will be paid in that currency. And the same can go for all methods of official issue of currency or how money gets deposited into the economy. One day you go and you withdraw 300 rand and it comes out as $300 or rands or uh, pesos or what have you, right? Whatever the currency will be called. And then there you have it. You have it. You don't need to go and buy it. Buying it and holding it, for me, it's like buying the rand and holding it. Okay. And finding a value for it. Yes, the rand, according to the Mozambican peso, is 10 times or 20 times stronger. Okay. So what? It's a currency. It's meant to be exchanged and traded. So for me, if you into that thing, buying and selling forex, buying and holding forex because it's going to become more valuable later, then it makes sense for you to buy the BRICS currency and then hold it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense at all for me. Now, tying up the currency as well as the representation that I spoke about earlier, the big thing for me is because I'm a shareholder in about 20 companies, Louis, Tile, Cashbuild, Exaro, Sibanye Gold, African Rainbow Minerals, Bola Metcalf, that sort of thing. What I do expect from my CEOs, from my chairpersons, is that they are paying attention to the T. I expect that they are part of the BRICS business councils. I expect that they do engage on these sort of things and what the future of trade looks like for them as a company. And those opportunities that open up, so the ability to sell furniture in China, for example, or the ability to sell minerals in Brazil, I expect that to show on the financial statements of the companies that I'm invested in. And through that, I then will benefit from BRICS. If that is not happening, then I will not be impressed at all. You know, I'm comfortable with my peers, my friends saying that they've not been involved and they're not able to access BRICS. It's inaccessible. And to an extent, I can see where they're coming from. I feel exactly the same way. That yes, I haven't gone out of my way to be part of BRICS, but I also haven't been so far away that it would have been impossible to include me. So I wouldn't understand if my CEO or the chairman of my company that makes billions feels exactly the same way. I mean, if we're doing business in China, we're doing business in Russia with some of the mines that I own, for example. So I expect the president or the prince or the CEO of those companies to engage and participate effectively. Obviously, that then speaks to what you guys know about my channel. We wouldn't be it if I don't talk finance and shareholding and advocate for it. But for me, that is the biggest way that I see how BRICS will impact me. I will see it in the dividends, I will see it in the growth in market share. And if I can't see it in that, then BRICS actually is a useless alliance, as some of you guys may have intimated in some of the conversations that we've had. Saudi Arabia coming on board, Egypt coming on board, Rwanda coming on board, all of those sort of things. I just expect that that is just going to add to the accessible market, which then goes to what I think BRICS is. I think BRICS is just the preferential market. It's just us as a community deciding that we are now going to sell to one another without charging each other um, exorbitant import duties and export duties, and to prioritize one another ahead of, let's say, for example, the US and Britain, which they do as well. They prioritize. I mean, you will remember very clearly with the vaccines that Africa and South Africa was very last on the list of people to receive that. So I'm comfortable if we go into alliances that say, well, when medication comes out from India, we should be the first to get it by virtue of being an alliance with BRICS. When oil is scarce in the world, if Saudi Arabia joins us, we should be the first to get it. It just makes sense for me and business sense. And by my companies being the leading industry players in this, I then expect that I should be able to get dividends from that increased market and from that preferential relationship that we've got with that. Look, for me, that is it. That is what I expect from BRICS. I know some other questions like what about South Africa's role in it? Ultimately, we're still somewhat the gateway to Africa, so I think that is very significant. Besides being the gateway to Africa, over the years we've been one of the countries that have had the biggest or the most minerals, what have you. And I think to that again, when I speak about my mining companies, when the currency becomes backed by gold or platinum or whatever mineral resources, as a shareholder of those companies, I expect those to be more valuable and I expect them to get more dividends from that. And that is why I say I don't really panic myself with that regard. I have said to you guys before that the fallacy that South Africa has got minerals is actually one that we need to examine. As far as I understand, mineral rights are given to companies, and those companies, some of us are shareholders in. And therefore, I don't think that South Africa particularly owns any minerals. There isn't any state-owned mining company. And as a result, if South Africa wants to back the currency by gold or by any mineral resource, they have to buy it from Sibanye or Goldfields or Harmony Gold or one of those companies, which is again why it's imperative to be a shareholder, because if the BRICS currency is going to be backed by commodities, the commodity seller becomes king in that sort of an environment. Outside of that, I think the biggest takeaway for me was the traditional medication sort of thing. I think that started to point a direction and create a sort of self introspection that says, what are the things that we stand for that we are currently not allowed to express? You know, is it the marital regime? Is it the ownership of resources? Is it the form of government? Is it the type of family structuring that we want to have? What are the things that we stand for that we feel as if by us being co-opted into the Western world, we essentially find ourselves as just pawns in a game much bigger than us? And if we became part of a body that gives us better representation and acknowledges us as human beings, we then would be more comfortable to express who we authentically are. You know, sifuna ukugqoka obheshu town, we want to be able to go abroad and not speak English and sikhuluma isiZulu, and you must get a translator to hear me. The same way that if a French person comes to South Africa, they get a translator for them to be heard. I don't understand why I need to laugh at my brother for not being able to speak English if the language that he speaks is perfectly valid and perfectly normal and is capable of communicating ideas and concepts. That for me would be my greatest wish from BRICS. The people that feel as if government is in charge and BRICS will somehow come with new empty promises, I think, in all honesty, nobody's making you specifically a promise. I think we've become used to the fact that when men gather in suits, they are promising us a better life or something. From the little that I've seen with the friends that I do have that are forward and participate in these sort of these things are just platforms. These things are just opportunities for people that take ownership of the outcomes of their efforts to be able to do it on a bigger scale with their country partners in other parts of the world. And not necessarily a daddy is going to town and he's going to come back with something. And if he comes back with nothing, then BRICS was a failure. I don't think it was meant to be that. I haven't heard any leader say that the outcome of BRICS should be a better life for South Africans, purely by virtue of us being there and us having a representative in there. I think BRICS is, as I say, just an opportunity for our aspirations as a people to be able to be given effect and a platform that recognizes us at a global level without us feeling as if we have to shy away. And as I say, for me, it was embarrassing that India and China had to come up with that suggestion when we count ourselves as a very cultural country. And that, as a result, um, should be something or a benchmark that says we need to assert ourselves more and do a lot of introspection as to what is it that we stand for and how then would we like to see it show itself in this BRICS alliance. Again, as I said, as a shareholder, I expect my companies to participate. So, for example, I'm a shareholder in Afrocentric. I expect Afrocentric, which is a medical company, to follow up with the Prime Minister of India and China. How did you manage to make traditional medicine more mainstream? And then, as a shareholder of Afrocentric, I expect to see them rolling out traditional medicines, either in pharmacies or in an alternative vehicle throughout the country and throughout the continent. And they can trace that right back to the BRICS summit, where they were given the power or the ability to assert themselves as an African country. And I expect that as an African company, sorry. And I expect that from all of my companies that I'm a shareholder in, that you find a way that you can find unique expression of what you do based on what is discussed at these platforms, and then come back and say that shareholder, here are your dividends, and they came as a result of us following up on some of the conversations and agreements that came out of BRICS. If we sit and do nothing, nothing will come out of BRICS, and it won't be a failure. It will just be that nothing came out. I see here it says on the website, the general purpose of BRICS, it is a mechanism that aims to promote peace, security, development, and cooperation. It doesn't mean that they will give it to you, it will just promote it. So if we're a peace-seeking country, if we're a security-seeking country, and we feel as if the West does not give life to those aspirations, then our alliance to BRICS should be able to give that to effect. If we are not, then BRICS has not failed. We just have not participated as a country. And I don't think we can blame BRICS for that. That is just who we are. I'm Chairman Mo. I wasn't expecting this to be a very long presentation. In future days, I am hoping to interview a few of my friends that were part of the BRICS delegation so that they can interview me. I mean, so that I can interview them and educate me even more about what is it that we're not understanding, how far away are we from the action, what is it that we can do to participate, should we even participate, is there anything that we gain by participating, and by not participating, is there anything that we particularly lose? And then even the issue of representation, does he feel as if he represents us? And to what extent then does he or do we feel that we can be part of this and make the most of it? We are young, we are aspirational, we are ambitious. I think these platforms are available, these alliances are available. It's up to us to use them. And us not using them just means that there will just be another tool that idles that is available to us. Check you guys on your next installment.